Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha here from Usersnap, and we're going to dive right in. So today's competitive market, consumers have an overwhelming array of product choices. According to Harvard Business Review, there's over 30 new products entering the market. And the key to influencing purchasing decisions by customer really rely on effective product positioning. So we're going to talk about how you could stand out from your competitors. And I'm really excited to have Anthony here to share his strategies and his expertise. Anthony, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, for sure. Glad to be here. I'm a partner at Fletch PMM, which is a two-person product marketing consultancy, primarily working with early stage B2B SaaS companies on their early stage positioning and how they actually message to the different people that they're targeting. So it's primarily those two pieces, messaging and positioning. And then often we will take those pieces and actualize them and help these startups and founders and marketing teams rewrite their marketing website pages. So usually homepage, but sometimes landing pages for specific segments.
Great. So then you have a ton of experience and you could share a lot of like the do's and don'ts and then what people should be doing.
Yeah, we've gotten a chance to work with close to 60 different startups.
Okay.
So we've seen across a wide array of vertical startups, horizontal startups, deep tech, really specific industry companies, ones that are a little bit more industry agnostic, physical goods,
Mm-hmm.
all kind of across the spectrum. And then even some outside of the startup landscape, we've worked with some big IPO'd software companies. We've worked with nonprofits. So yeah, we've really gotten to test and iterate with our framework
Mm-hmm.
tons of times to make it as robust as it can possibly be.
Great. That's fantastic. All right. So you've worked with all these companies, what are the key factors to consider when you're developing your positioning strategy, say at the startup? You have your product and you need to develop a positioning strategy. And when you're working with your clients, is there a specific framework that's like your go-to?
Yep. We've actually been developing a framework, and I'll actually share my screen.
Right.
We call it minimum viable positioning, or like an MVP, in the same way that you have a minimum viable product that is a incomplete but good enough to provide value version of your product. We think that you also need to have a slightly incomplete but good enough version of your positioning in order for people to start spreading the message about who you are, word of mouth to work, any of that stuff. So the way that we think about it is really there's these 8 different elements. The top side here, we have these 4 elements that are really centered on the market segment that you're going after. And on the bottom side, you have the product, and it could be talked about across these 4 different dimensions. So the piece where it comes into play is that most like positioning Mad Lib frameworks, where you have we're the blank type of company serving blank type of customer with blank type of problem, they require completeness in order to work. And what
Right.
happens in the startup world, you don't always have completeness. If you had the perfect answer to every one of these boxes, you would have product market fit, you would be on your way to scaling, and you might not even be a startup anymore. So what we find is that you don't actually need every single box in order to make positioning work. You need at minimum 1 box in the top half and 1 box in the bottom half. So just having 1 element on the top, 1 on the bottom is enough to convey the message that of who you are and who you serve. And it seems kind of obvious, but it took us a long time to get there, that
Yeah.
essentially if you want to get to product market fit and you need to message and position, you need to say something about the product and something about the market. So it's right there in the name. And even us as product marketers, right? Product and market, it makes sense that you would need something from both. So we run this exercise with startups where essentially before we get in the first workshop with them, we try to fill out as much as we can from how they're positioned today. So we'll look at their
Mhm.
website. We might look at some ads that they've run. We'll look at ways that they talk about themselves in their investor deck, and we'll pre-fill out a bunch of these things. And so maybe they have 5 different personas that they're going after, 6 different company types, a couple different use cases, and maybe they solve a multitude of problems. And on the other side, maybe they call themselves 3 or 4 different product categories. They say we have all these different outcomes we lead to, and we do it through these product capabilities, which are powered by these features. So across those 8 elements, really, it is conclusive of like, this is everything. But at
Mhm.
this token, the way that our model works is that we need to get to where we can choose one element per box. So each element can only have one. You can't stuff 5 different personas. And you'll see this on websites. It'll
Yeah.
say, it'll have the rotating. It'll say, we're the tool for, sales teams. And then it'll flip and say marketing teams. And it'll say product. And it's like, we're pretty anti that approach because we think it's like it's like a cheap trick to try to avoid having a position.
Right.
But what we found is that vertical companies that are really focused on an industry will often have something in the company type. So maybe it's like they have, we're serving oil and gas companies, and maybe they even have a department in the persona. We're serving, the finance teams of oil and gas companies, but they may not find one key use case to anchor on. They might have multiple because they're a platform for oil and gas companies, the legal teams. So we do a multitude of use cases, but having this left side filled out enough is usually good to actually communicate what type of market we're going after, versus a lot of the famous horizontal companies that have gained a lot of fame, right? Asana, Slack, Zoom, they might have a single use case or a single problem and not be able to anchor on a persona or company type because it's so varied. So like, for example, if the use case is I'm trying to video chat for Zoom, for example, say the product category or even maybe the capability would be like set up a video call with anyone for free would be the capability. And it's with the use case of video chatting. So that gets you both sides. That could be infinite variations of personas who would do that, an infinite variation of company types, but having something on both sides is enough that the message of what is Zoom could proliferate throughout all of society, especially during the pandemic, right? I need a way to talk to people on the internet, and now I can set up a call right away in my browser, whatever that might be. And so that allows the word of mouth transfer. So we usually see when people have the left 2 filled out or one of the left 2, it's usually a vertical focused company. And if they have the right 2 filled out, but can't really narrow down this, it's usually a horizontal company. So I'll pause there. That's kind of like a fast overview of how we think about positioning. I'm sure there's good follow-up questions and things.
Yeah, I want to follow up on what you were speaking about, the personas, and then how sometimes it's companies are, not really identifying who at first that one persona is and who are they serving. So unlike the example you just gave with like, if you're a video platform, but say you're a company, for how important is it to really focus at first on one persona that cares about your product, and then you expand. So for example, with us at Usersnap, we focus on understanding the jobs to be done by first developers, then QA individuals, and now we're looking at the whole product team and coming full cycle, because we started off as just, a bug visual tracking capability that you could just screenshot and you get the metadata, resolve the issues faster, to now a whole feedback widget that allows you to capture, organize, respond, and build better products. So it's a full feedback, but that took time, right? We didn't just say, okay, we're going to target everyone at once. We started off first. So how important is that? And do you still live by that? Okay, yes, you should really start off with who's your core.
Yeah. And so for us, it comes down to that who, if we're talking mostly B2B, and our experience is 99% B2B, B2B world, choosing a departmental entry point with a persona in a department is usually going to be the smartest option for most products.
Okay.
Most products will have an entry point of saying, even if I can work with sales and marketing and product, there is no buying committee of those 3 teams who all sit together once a week and shop for software together. So likely you're going to have to target one of those groups, get one of them on board enough, and then help expand to the other parts of the organization. So if marketing is the key way in, then what you're going to try to do is get marketing to convince product or to convince engineering. Or if you're a product-led company, maybe the product is doing that expansion, right? It's telling you, hey, share this with your product team or whatever it is. So focusing on a persona as an entry point for most B2B products is usually the way to go.
Okay.
On the flip side, if you're doing a more use case based product, sometimes it's less important the position. Like take Loom, for example. Loom is you record your screen and you can record yourself and your screen at the same time. that will show up in a lot of different roles in a lot of different ways. And so there isn't like one group of people who needs to record their screen, but that's such a specific use case of how do I record my face and my screen at the same time? So what we see is like with the use case based ones, usually their go-to-market motions are a little bit more based on like SEO is usually an example. So Zapier has a bunch of different use cases that are persona agnostic. How do I connect my Slack to my Airtable? That
Right.
could be for a bunch of different reasons. And so what they do is they have this giant SEO strategy where they've built essentially a use case page for every possible use case in existence. So when people Google, how do I connect my Slack to whatever, Zapier will pop up first in everything you could do. So SEO becomes a really powerful strategy when you don't have a specific departmental or role-based persona. You have more of a use case-based persona. And even still other ways of like some companies we've seen have utilized platforms like TikTok, which are like, check out these 10 crazy tools, and you're one of the tools.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. Anyone on TikTok could see that, and then people will self-select. But we often see that there's a curve where even use case-based companies like Slack, like Zoom, like Loom, all these ones that started specific,
Yeah.
eventually you tap off your organic growth or your SEO-based growth. And eventually, when you get big enough, you have to layer on the persona-based growth anyways. So even if you started like Slack famously used to say, the founder was like, we have no salespeople. We have no plans to ever add any salespeople. The product just grows by itself. Well, eventually they tapped out that organic growth around the use case of we need to have this place to chat. And then now they have something like 900 salespeople. And so
Exactly.
they've layered on all these persona-based things. Here's how we sell into sales teams. Here's how we sell into marketing teams. Here's how we sell into product teams. Because eventually you just want both of those levers. So even
Right.
though you start at different places, persona-based targeting always will end up in your mix if you survive long enough as a company.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, because with on your last point on Slack, like Slack has, their whole enterprise
Yep.
level of packaging. And of course, when it comes to sales, like yes, they start off as self-serve, but then now,
Yep.
to be enterprise ready and to fulfill enterprise needs, you do need like a full sales team with account managers.
100%.
Makes
Totally
sense.
true.
All right. So you also mentioned, we talked about the homepage, and this is always a topic of debate or people have their preference. Of course, homepages need to look first great and needs to have good information, but I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts on what should the homepage look like, what information should be included, what information should not be there, and overall, like what are the biggest mistakes you continuously see today that surprise you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the problem is the mistakes are so common that they no longer surprise me. They all are kind of the same, and they appear. And I'm actually going to pull up. So we've been all of our content lives basically on LinkedIn. We've talked about doing a newsletter and other things like that, but right now everything we think about product marketing and homepages, my partner and I, just lives on LinkedIn. So we've actually built this Notion database of all of our best practices. So like when you ask, what do you think about homepages? This is essentially, we have quite a few thoughts on how you should structure homepages and stuff. So if you're interested in this database, I have a link to it on my profile on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect. But yeah, so like, for example, some of the common mistakes that we see, right? Like here's a couple of them is just like too many messages at once, having very divergent product categories. We see in a lot of the other case where people will lead with the benefits of the product, which are like the outcomes. And there's a very like common reason for this of when everything in the economy was kind of going not so well for tech. There's all this belt tightening, and the CFO ends up being the kind of person who kills the deal at the last stage. So then everyone reactionary switched and said, we need to lead with what's going to convince the CEO, the CFO.
Right.
So they all started putting ROI metrics on the homepage. But what ends up happening is when you do that, it actually hides what your product does. So like, for example, if you lead with 10x your ROI, drive revenue, save time, that could apply to hundreds of different products. And we did a post. I don't know if it's in this section. Maybe I don't have it handy, but basically we looked at these multiple different tools that were all in different categories. They all did different things, but based on, maybe I have it in this section too, based on how they were targeting the CFO, they all ended up saying the identical thing. And I'm not,
Oh my.
it's not coming up, but I could probably find it if
You
I
could
dug a
probably
little.
like share that after, and then we could post that, and that I'm interested to see that. Yeah.
It was essentially like a sales enablement tool and a lead scoring tool and a product-led sales company. And there were all these different things, and they all essentially had the same hero. And it was all like drive more revenue, increase your revenue. And so that's probably the biggest mistake. So we see people leading with the ROI and the benefit without first answering the question of like, what is it? Who
Mhm.
is it for? What does it do? And we've seen this actually not just in our own work, but like that company called Winter that does testing, message testing, even in their data, people don't believe the ROI unless they first understand and believe in the how and the what. So
Yeah.
they're not even going to care that you can 10x their whatever
Yeah.
unless they first believe in like, what actually are you doing? And we've like to use the example of like ice baths. So that became a big thing. Take an ice bath and they lead with the outcome. You're going to sleep better. You're going to feel better. And people are like, the jump doesn't make sense. They're like submerging myself in an ice bath for
It's
5 minutes.
solve all of this.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna sleep better. Like, I don't get
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
then you people like that Andrew Huberman guy talk on a podcast for an hour about how all these specific biological things happen. And then you're like, okay, now I'm starting to believe the ROI. I'm starting to believe it, and maybe I'll give it a try. So that's the biggest issue we see always is leading with the benefits when you should actually flip it. You should lead with what are the capabilities? Like what can I do with this product? And then once I have bought into that, then you close with the ROI. It's actually the exact opposite. Don't lead with the benefit, end with the benefit, because ideally you've convinced them with showing all these things that it's worth trying.
Right, right, right. And that should, and you believe like the capabilities and the benefit, it's okay to live on the homepage. It's just like what you start with and what you end with.
Agreed. And we have different levels of how specific you can get depending on how complex your company is. So if you have a single point solution as your product, like in the early days of Uber, Uber was one product that you would click a button and the ride people would come and pick you up. Point solution. And there's a million examples of these companies that have gotten massive from a point solution. So
Mhm.
those companies, they can talk about individual features on their homepage because they're just explaining one problem and how they solve it, and they can go into the different features, right? Like you don't
Mhm.
have to pay for it in the moment. You don't have to hand over your money.
Right.
It's the money on the back end. And so you could get to the specific level. So anytime you're talking about like one point solution, you will be able to give the most compelling message possible. If you level up and now you're selling a platform with multiple point solutions, you can't probably get to the individual feature level. You kind of have to talk it like this part of the platform does this type of stuff. This part does this type of stuff. So it becomes less compelling because it's just less specific. And then when you get to the level of companies that have multiple platforms, now you're basically just talking at the brand level. You can't even really say anything meaningful about the products anymore. And that's usually a signal. If a company has gotten so big, that's a signal where like you pass the torch from the homepage is no longer a product marketing exercise. It's a
Mhm.
brand marketing exercise because you're no longer marketing the product, you're marketing the company as a whole.
Right.
But what we find is that startups get confused and they overbuild and they create platforms as if they were this giant multi-billion-dollar company, and they don't even have product market fit with any of their point solutions. And they bundle all these bad point solutions, make a big platform, and then try to sell it. And they're confused why no one gets it. And they're like, maybe we should just talk about the brand, but they have zero brand equity because no one even knows who they are. So that's what we often see as another big problem.
Yeah, so it's like if you're not to that level of brand recognition, you really need to focus on your capabilities, and that's what's really going to drive the interest, because that's when people are kind of like, okay, I want to know more. This is solving my problems, my needs.
Exactly. And usually people in the early days of a startup, when you first heard about any of the platforms that you like, someone explained it to you in the language most likely of capabilities. So when I first heard that I needed a password manager, before I knew that that was a product category, someone told me about the company called LastPass. And I said, well, what is it? And they said, well, you know how you like always are losing your passwords and you're trying to write them down? I'm like, yeah. They're like, you could store them all in one login and it will just populate it on whatever website. That's a capability. And it was solving such a real problem that I was like, I'm getting it. So I got it. And eventually LastPass has gotten bigger and now has competitors, and they've all gotten bigger and do a lot more things. But in the early days, to find product market fit, it really is almost like capability market fit. It's like, is there one thing that you do that people think is so interesting that they would download it? Another one is early stage right now is Fathom, the video recorder.
Mhm.
Usually for a lot of people, the capability of saying this little bot joins my Zoom call and records it is enough for people to download it. Even though they
Right.
do a bunch of different things, you can pull out snippets of different parts of it. It'll do the transcription. All that stuff is interesting. But the main reason is, and they even lead with it. I think if you look at their website, it says like, never take notes on a Zoom call again. Like,
Yeah.
problem is so tangible and people are like, I'll do it. They're
Yeah.
not looking for a platform. Usually they're looking for a point solution.
Right. And it's so interesting you said that, because anytime we like, as just we are having a normal conversation with your friend, or if you're explaining someone a product, you're always using the capabilities or the like examples. That's just our natural way of describing something. And that's the quickest where you say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I get it. Not by speaking about, oh, it's going to let you do this. You really just have to talk about like, what is the product, get to the point, what can I do?
Exactly. And we've also joked around that like people don't shop for KPIs, like
Right.
they're not like, I need to buy 20% revenue bump, right?
Mm.
Like they have internal KPIs and ROI and things that they're trying to get to. And then they come up with a solution that they think will do it. And then they go and shop for that. Like there's that thing. People don't buy a 1/4 inch drill. They buy a 1/4 inch hole. Like
Yeah.
I fundamentally, like, I get where they're coming from,
Yeah.
but that single statement has taken in marketing teams, especially startup marketing teams, in such a wrong direction. Like,
Right.
especially because it's applied to the tech world, and people are like, they don't realize a drill has been around for, you know, decades and decades and decades, if not even hundreds of years. And so everyone knows what a drill is, and no one knows what your software is. So if you just talk about that outcome of whatever the 1/4 inch hole is, well, we're going
Yeah.
to drop this revenue, but they don't even know what they're holding. They don't have a
Yeah.
drill in their hand,
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting. Yeah, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
No, that's correct. And we're just talking about how, just simply explaining what your product does, right? And understanding the capabilities, that's like the effective way to have a messaging to have on your homepage. But sometimes we if you I want to talk about like finding your uniqueness and
Yeah.
what is it you're really talking about, because your product could have a lot of cool things, but you can't just talk about all of those things at once. Some of those capabilities could be overlapping with your competitors, but finding your uniqueness through positioning. So for example, like with us at Usersnap, we went through this whole like framework of a positioning framework and messaging, and to really identify, okay, you know who your direct competitors are, and finding your uniqueness and understanding that and saying, okay, this is our differentiating from the rest. There are some of these other capabilities that are overlapping, but this is why we're the best, because we're the only one that, for example, we talk about like just having it easy setup, or that multiple teams could use it. So the website capturing tool is not just for one application. It could be used if you have internal, external, and we know that it is easy for multiple teams to set up and all of those things because we have those features available. How is important is that to really know your uniqueness and not get in a tangent of like talking about everything?
Yeah, yeah. So we actually have another workshop that we run with the companies that we work with. So I'll
Mhm.
actually share my screen again. Basically, what we try to do, we call this our value proposition messaging canvas. And what we say is that you should only ever explain features and capabilities in relation to problems that are caused by the other solutions of people doing something. So to give you an example, we did this for Figma. Like this wasn't actually really what Figma said probably, but like this was basically what the messaging would have been in the early days. So people would use, especially if your target customer is this design lead, they would have different use cases for why they might use Figma. So on the left side of the screen, this is like before Figma comes into the picture.
Mhm.
Without Figma, you're trying to, maybe the use cases, you're trying to design a web app interface with your team. How are you doing it? At that point, they were using Sketch, which was the giant competitor that everyone was using when Figma was the newcomer on the scene.
Mhm.
But the problem was it was a really slow and inefficient process because of, and then this is the limitation of using Sketch, because Sketch doesn't allow multiple people to work on the same file at the same time. Then we transitioned. Okay, so that's created an opening to highlight a differentiating capability of Figma. So the Figma one is now with Figma, you can work with your teammates in the same file at the same time with this real-time collaboration feature, which drives this outcome of your team can immediately build off each other's ideas. And this benefit, this outcome is the direct reversal of the problem that was caused by how they were doing it. But we wanted to show is that the current ways of doing things aren't always a direct competitor company. So even back then, say another use case was they were trying to collect design feedback from other stakeholders. They might have been doing it by emailing screenshots. But what ends up happening is the feedback ends up not being very helpful because the stakeholders can't really see everything in context of the designs. So now the capability of Figma would be that you can invite stakeholders to comment directly on the designs in their full context with these shareable links that could be opened in a browser. So you can get better feedback that helps improve like what you're actually doing. So the differentiation comes from, and this sounds silly, comes from differentiating of how they're doing it, right? Of saying, you're doing things this way. And like the perfect example is the old school infomercials that would run late at night. And they would be like, you're trying to, you've got all your Tupperware and it's all over the place and you're trying to find the lid for the, and they show a person like in the middle of trying to put the lids on their Tupperware and everything's falling over. Now we have this new system where it's, you never lose it. And they show the new product, or like Instagram ads are kind of like the current day infomercials. They'll always show like I always get this ad. I don't know why they think I need this, but my shoes are not fitting. So I can just step into my shoes without having to reach down and pull them with whatever one they were doing. So yeah, we end up getting these better differentiation when we actually tie it to the specific boxes of how they're doing it today.
Right. No, that's like the strongest, like once you find that and you know it, then that's kind of like your armor, right? Like, why this product is better.
100%.
Yeah, that's great. Well, because this is like, of course I told you like we'll have like a short chat because I wanted to, we follow you and we're always taking good tips that you are sharing and applying them to how we do our work internally. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us, or, I will, wrap up in a few minutes.
Yeah, I think anyone who's, looking for help on their positioning or messaging, if you're in that early stage bucket and you're struggling, feel free to reach out. Like I connect with everyone who sends me a request on LinkedIn. I'm super reachable.
Yes.
If people comment on anything, I usually comment right back on the post and try to get to everyone. So yeah, feel free to extend a connection. LinkedIn is probably the best way that we connect with people.
Great. Thanks for that. And thanks so much for taking the time and working with us and sharing your insight. And I look forward for us chatting again in the future.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.